If you're still struggling with workers after they've been hired, I want to walk through in this video some tangible things that you can go ahead and do. I'll also include a worksheet down below so you could work with me through this and we could help solve some of those worker issues. But before we dive in, if you're new here, hey, I'm Crystal from CrystalBella.com, a hiring expert. We help tons of business owners attract, hire, and onboard quality workers. So if that's your cup of tea, definitely hit subscribe and join the family. Definitely help support this channel. So let's dive in. And I hope you enjoy today's video. I see a lot of business owners think that a training is a one-time thing or a 3-day thing and send them off to the races and they're going to kind of learn along the way and kind of put their hands up. They kind of back out of that process. Or you may spend a week with somebody and then jump out and not really support them in additional areas to help them improve or to offer quarterly or monthly training sessions for the whole company and kind of get overwhelmed with that training process, either because they don't know what they're doing. It's, they're kind of just figuring it out as they go. And there's nothing wrong with that, but by doing certain things, you're not setting them up for success. And I believe there's a better way to set them up for success so you can eliminate some of these issues. And I'm going to dive into a framework real quick on how you can kind of assess this and do it for your company. I hear it all the time on business owners saying, oh, well, they need to do it just like me, or they can't do it as good enough, or they're not as fast enough. And they get frustrated, and that frustration goes on to the workers. They feel it. They're not stupid. And it's an overarching process to kind of train and get them to do what you want them to do, to get motivated to do the job that you're having them to do. Because that motivation, let's just face it, it's not always there. And sometimes it's other things that kind of can happen in our daily routine that could re-motivate us. And sometimes it could be one person or one thing at the start of the day. For instance, having a daily team meeting that goes over something that's positive. You start the meeting with some, exciting music and you're getting that vibe up. That could be one thing that triggers that motivation for that day. But if you stop it 2 weeks after and you start to see that motivation die down, it's typically due to your consistency, not something else. Motivation is hard. And sometimes as a business owner, we have to add in those segments to continue to motivate our team, to continue to make sure that they're back onto the path that we want them to. So if they're calling out, so if they're not sticking to job times, not returning the supplies, falling off track in some which way, quality, so on and so forth, there's things that you need to do at the company level to help set them up for success, set the expectations, and just bring it back to reality. But in the end, consistency is what's going to help get this going and stay going. Because if you continue to let them stay on their own path for too long, it's typically really hard to kind of pull them back into a very new path or a new way of doing stuff, especially if you do it more often than not. So I want to take you through our F-Diet framework and really walk you through diagnosing what some of these problems are, and then how to think about each problem and how we would solve that at a larger level. So let's dive in. All right, so I have our performance improvement worksheet pulled up using our F-Diet framework. I'll go ahead and include a link down below so you can go ahead and print out a version of this and go ahead and handwrite onto this exact sheet and follow along with me. All right, so diving into how we would do this, the very first step is to list out all of the problems that you're currently facing with workers, typically post-hiring process, typically within that first week, first 30 days. This is typically what I'm referring to. If you do have somebody that's been with you for 3 years and they're having these problems, it's most likely going to be easier to replace them versus trying to teach new habits. If you heard the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, very similar concept. It's really hard. So I want you to list out all the problems that you have. It's going to look a little something like this. So just by writing down all the different issues that you're currently having, you're going to be able to look at the problem and assess each and every section. So let's go over what the F-Diet framework stands for. It stands for follow through, deal breakers, interview questions, expectations, and training. And if you work with contractors, your training is going to be referred to as your powerhouse orientation. So if you have a specific problem, for instance, call out, I want you to look at each section for call outs. Is there anything that you could do on the follow through to help decrease this problem? So for instance, I could make sure that our team gets written up. We could make sure we could have a 3 to make, maybe you already have like a 3 call out process and you're fired, but you're not sticking with it. Okay, you're not following through with it. Make sure team follows through with 3 call out fire process. So you'll start to have some solutions as far as follow through that you could work on with your team in order to make sure that you're improving callouts. So you want to kind of figure out as much as you can. Maybe you have existing policies and stuff, but your team, your admin isn't following through with them. This typically happens if you don't have enough workers, you don't have a good hiring process, you feel stuck with your team, you just feel like you can't replace them, you're stuck relying on them, they have too many of your clients, and it's just going to be a pain. This is when company owners are typically starting to worry about a lot of the process. And it sucks. It sucks because, again, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So it's just going to be better to replace them and to make sure that these processes and this stuff is being taught and followed through with your team for new hires. All right, so you've gone through the follow through. If there's anything else, you would jot it down. Now, is there anything under the deal breakers that you could help? And this deal breakers, I'm talking about the application deal breakers at this point. Is there anything that you could do on the application level to reduce callouts? You could possibly add a scenario-based question if you wanted to. I don't think it's necessary. If you had an excessive amount of traffic, maybe you could put a 3 scenario, like if you were to call out which one of these would you do, make them very obvious. Again, I wouldn't personally do that unless you had like thousands of people applying. And if you're having hundreds, again, I don't think you should have that question on there. All right, so then you would look under interview questions. Is there anything interview-wise that you could do as far as call-outs to help reduce call-outs? Yeah, I would say there's definitely some questions that you could have. I would really pick 1 question, tops 2, to go ahead and give scenario-based question. And the way we like to do our interview questions is a scoring technique. So we have a specific question and we have 3 possible answers. 1 answer would be they're a complete no-go, 1 would be an acceptable response, and 1 would be like an excellent response. And if they have a scoring point, so they have a 4, a 6, or a 10, depending on which answer they choose, and they have to score an 80 or higher in order to get through the interview process. So this could be one of your questions. I really don't recommend more than 10 questions on the interview. So make sure your questions are selective. But essentially, you could. So at this point, I would recommend actually writing out the interview question that you would have. And again, I'm just going to put example or text here because you get the idea. I said the example for you. All right, so then we would go on to expectations. Are you properly setting the expectations when it comes to call-outs? Like, what are they supposed to do if they're sick? What if they have I hate that flat tire excuse. You know, what are the steps? What is the process? Not only what is the process, but what does your team expect to do when you have a call-out? What does that typically look like? Is there something that your team, do they have to submit a form? Do you send a Slack out to all your team? Do you have a worker on standby to go ahead and fill in for any callouts that day? I heard a really amazing process that somebody have, and I love that, so I'd love to share it with you. Is essentially any time that they had a a call out, they would always have one worker that was on standby. So every single worker had like one day where they were on standby. Not every single, well, it depends on how many workers you have and how wide the scheduling routes are. But essentially, you would have one person per day on standby for call outs, and they basically had to be on call for like 4 hours, right? And if they were to get a call, they would basically know to come into work and work that day. Now, they would get paid for this specific day, and if they didn't hear by like anybody at 10 o'clock, they knew that they had the rest of the day off. And of course, if I've heard people say too, well, what if, oh, well, if my workers did that, they would just get paid and they would never come in and they would give me some excuse. Well, they wouldn't be on the call list. They wouldn't be part of that option, and they would never qualify for it again if that was the case. Again, setting those expectations, not only for the new hire, your existing workers, but also your team on how to handle it when that scenario occurs. So write it down what you need to do as far as expectations all around company-wide to help fix at this time. And then diving into the call-out thing. What would you do during the training or the orientation process? Could you maybe you have it into a PDF of the employee handbook, but it's 70 pages and you have a DocuSign thing and they skip through 70 pages with one click of a button. That's not a great way for them to comprehend what they just learned or to really understand those key points. Instead, pulling out those things that you really want them to know and putting it into a video format is going to be typically the best option. Now, when it comes to training, orientation, don't feel like you only have to have it in the beginning of the process. This could be a quarterly training, a monthly training. If you already have this into the training, definitely assess if you need to have it on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, or a yearly reoccurring training to where they're always being reiterated about the call out policy, so on and so forth, and the procedure about that, and just making sure that, again, you're improving each of these things, going through all of the problems that you have. When you start to look at it this way, it makes it a lot easier to be able to think about how you can improve it for your company. You would essentially go through each one of these problems. Just know that you don't have to have an answer for every one. As you see, we didn't put anything down for deal breakers, right? Because we didn't need to. We didn't want to. You don't have to. So, go through the process, and I hope this helps. Let me know in the comments down below if you printed out the worksheet, if you did it, if this was helpful, what was your biggest takeaway? I'd love to know.